IO1, so it's the basis for all the next intellectual output. What is it? It's essentially a research, because it's a research about what is the state of the youth centers in Europe, in several countries. How do we go about understanding what the youth centers are or exist? We go data hunting. We go to seek exactly what these youth centers are. We go to look for information which are critical to essentially support our own investigation. How do we do this? We go to look for 5 youth centers in Poland. This is essentially what our population look like, our statistical population of youth center that is part of the analysis. We have 6, more in Italy, we have 12 in Sweden, and we have more in Germany and then in Portugal. In total, we have a population of 53 youth centers. We extract data from study visits, from job shadowings, and ultimately also through questionnaire that we give to the youth center people, that this allow for them to give data to basically what is this about. We, as researchers, went into these 5 different countries armed with some questions, and we had to write reports about youth centers. And these reports were pre-filled with question about 5 different frameworks. These frameworks were the legal framework, of how the youth centers works, the financial framework of the youth center works in, how the policy framework is for the youth center, how the participatory framework, and the organizational frameworks. What is a legal framework? As you saw yesterday, the definition of youth center is very, very difficult to agree upon. So it's also difficult to agree what is a legal framework for a youth center. We made several questions to the researchers after their travels. And the scopes of the discussions were essentially to identify what are the most impactful things that regard youth center about their existence, basically. This is about the legal framework. How do they justify their existence in face of the law? How do they justify their existence in face of the political power, and so on? So we made some questions, and the answers were already divided into categories. So, for example, in Italy, we saw that there was the greatest difference of solution found to the matter of how do these youth centers exist. The type of relationship or contract was found to be essential to the working of the This sounds very obvious, but this is essential for the working of the center. So the type of relationship with public authorities was essentially what defined mostly what was the youth center about. So, for example, in Italy, there was the greatest difference of legal solutions found to how to build a social youth center. While, for example, in Portugal was the least various nations, because all the centers in Portugal were essentially mandated by public founding contracts, basically, founding legislative acts. Another difference was between Germany and Portugal, where these countries were essentially very top-heavy countries because they have the strongest legislative systems. So while, for example, in Poland and Italy, young people have to invent their own way to come up with a youth center, it's very different in Germany and Portugal, where a legislative framework for the creation of youth center exists. Let's take the case of Germany. Germany has the legislative framework very rigid from top to bottom. So, for example, there is a law, but before even the law, there is the right of the youth in the constitution. After the law, there is the regional law, and then the local law, and then the decision of the youth council. So all of these passages are very much structured about the concept of youth center. On the opposite, in other countries, this is very much not the case. For example, in Italy, we have a youth policy at national level, but at national level only, So there is not much enforced, there is no strong link between the levels. The fact that each center are not mandatory makes so that each level of jurisdiction basically is not coordinated between each other. In any case, by all of our population surveyed, the recognition process and the possession of the existence of this recognition process for each center was basically non-existent. So there is not a unified recognition process that says, okay, this structure is now a youth center. And this is also kind of understandable. If this recognition process was something that existed based on our research, it would have been easy to find a definition of youth center, but this is hard because there is no recognition process, which is very diffuse. Essentially, at the legal level, we have two distinct groups of countries that emerged, which is Germany, Sweden, and Portugal with long life expectancy, and other countries like Italy and Poland that instead have shorter life expectancy. This is the strongest relationship that we have between the two systems, basically. In one, there are short-lived projects, and in another group, there are instead long-lived projects. Another big finding was the fact that the absence of a national law is not immediately related to the fact that there is a common framework. Essentially, the absence of a national regulation does not always produce the effect of the diversity of legal solutions. Why? Because, for example, in Sweden, there is no national law on youth centers, but there are youth centers everywhere and they all follow the same patterns. So many researchers, for example, said there is no legal framework, but then the legal framework, okay, of the Swedish youth centers was very much defined. So you can have a very strong network of youth centers, and you can have a very strong, essentially, cultural youth centers, and they can be very much present without the need of a national level legislation. But why? Because in this country, there is a tradition about youth centers that come at basically municipal level. And this is also ties in with the other finding of the relationship with the closest decision maker. So they are an example of the subsidiary principle, because it doesn't matter very much the relationship between the youth center and the national government or the national politics. What matters is the relation between the youth center and the local politics. So the subsidiarity rule is one of the principles of the European Union that says that the rights of the citizens needs to be ensured, guaranteed by the administration which is the closest to the citizen. So my rights needs to be guaranteed by my municipality first. Where my municipality does not arrive, has not the power to guarantee my rights, then the region comes in. Where the region does not come in, then the nation comes in. Where the nation does not come in, then the European Union comes in. We went here and we talked about solutions found about this relationship, and we talked about what kind of philosophy these two groups of nations find, the absence of a recognition process, and the fact that there is a life expectancy.
This thing of the coherence Council of Europe, I guess.
Yes.
Okay, quality labor. Can you explain more?
Yes. Essentially, we measured the presence or absence, or even if there were only the prerequisites of the youth center to get the quality label of the Council of Europe, which is already one of the structured, which is a structured form of recognition for the youth center. But most of the population of youth center that we surveyed either doesn't have the requirements or does not need to work with young people to actually pursue this recognition, because I can tell you 75% or even more, maybe 85% doesn't have didn't follow and doesn't have this quality label.
Yeah. But it's not absolutely necessary to have them, no? curriculum for Council of Europe is about youth centers that also provide accommodation, do international youth work, focus on democracy and the priorities of Council of Europe. So this is one of the options for getting a recognition for youth centers, but it's a very rare framework that we can do.
European
European,
centers,
yeah.
so it's a specific kind
Mhm.
of center.
Sometimes you can find around Europe, not the real European Youth Center. Like, they have like a proper list. There are like maybe 20 recognized all around Europe, so very little. And but if you check better, you can find a lot of European Youth Center that they are not connected with the quality label or the Council of Europe.
Just using the name.
Yeah, they're just using the name.
Yeah, so I don't know if I understand correctly, but you said that some countries that you, like Portugal and the other countries, don't have the legal framework for youth centers. So yours, and you said that they don't need it?
No, sorry. What I said was that many researchers, this is something funny that we were finding in our research. Every time the report of the researchers started with the same pretty much words, which is country, does not have a legal framework for the youth centers. This is the first line. On the second line and the following 50 lines, they proceed to explain the legal framework that they say is absent. This is because sometimes in our mind think that a legal framework is something so complete and comprehensive that has to follow the youth center like a constitution, like a constitutional youth center that has to say youth center is you can create a youth center with the people you need are the structured process to follow is. If you take this definition of a legal framework, you don't have it, not even in no country in Europe. No country does that, not even Germany, which is the most top heavy at legislative process. So this is what I was saying, that basically everyone says there is no legal framework, but actually legal frameworks is plural because there are very different legal frameworks from country to country. And for the case of Portugal, I had a very nice discussion with Carla and also Marina, because it's true that Portugal does not mandate youth centers for local administrations. But still, compared to the other three countries, is the second country after Germany for quantity of legislation on youth centers themselves, and not about abstract youth policy, which is something we will talk about when we will see the chapter about policy. Because I don't know if it's here, but I think it's later.
In your statistical analysis, so you didn't specify exactly what kind of framework you were, like which kind of administration level you were pointing to, right? So you didn't say, the question was just, does your country provide a good framework for youth centers? It was not like, you didn't specify it more, right?
Yes, exactly. And the question was actually even more vague. The question was just what is the legal framework on this youth center? Because we just wanted to provide people with their impression about how the youth centers justify their existence in the face of the political and violent power of the state, basically, and the administration. So it's very broad. And it has to be very broad because otherwise, already like this, everyone said, no, there is no legal framework. But it has to be very broad, otherwise we don't find the solutions that the young people and youth workers and the local decision makers found to the problem of legitimacy, which is essentially what is the framework about. Like what legitimacy this youth center has, what's the legal justification, how they come to occupy this space, why is this space not something else?
Yes.
Okay.
But
Thanks.
maybe it just I suggest just an idea which popped out to my mind now. When I think about support, legal support to youth center, I mostly think about like lower level of administration in the sense of I don't know, like municipality, maybe province. Maybe specifying it more, you will have we can have more answers. That's just a suggestion. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yes, I see your point. That would have brought more precise answers, but then we would have lost all of the country environment. And this we want to find an European framework, and we also need information about how the country and the culture around the youth center shape the youth center itself.
Can you repeat what you mean with top heavy, please?
What I mean with
Top habit.
the fact that there is a lot of
Top
legislation and from national level. Top heavy means most of the rules come from a center, and this center is not even local, it's national or regional. So the opposite of the subsidiarity principle that I was talking before.
So you start from national legislation and you go all the way down to
In the countries that
I
are
don't know,
top
like,
heavy,
yes.
youth center base their existence more on national level, even though the local level is also always very important. But basically, in the countries that are not top heavy, the national level is irrelevant. While in the countries where that are top heavy, get a lot of rules to follow from the superior levels, so regional, national, and so on. This means top heavy means rules to follow.
But that also means that the legitimization comes from the central level more than the local, and it is not clearly defined about the rules on the national level. It is indicated that youth center exists, and this is what it is, and you can do it on a lower level of administration, and then the lower level of administration is regulating it in more detail and can also specify how they do that in particular. So the regions can differ from one another. So it's not only about heavity of the rules, but where the legitimization come from. And if it's from central level, it's much more often that youth centers are welcomed, or even not obligatory, but welcomed to organize.
Yes, it depends on who is doing the welcoming. But yes, because not always central or top heavy legitimacy results in social welcome. Like, for example, in some centers in Germany, I think it's always where there is no traditional centers like in Sweden, the welcome of the population is always linked to an effect somehow. Chapter 2 was about the financial frameworks. We found as first things that youth centers have costs, of course. Youth center main costs are human resources, by large, so staff, facility maintenance, program expenses, and other operational outlays. Generally, in our survey population, youth centers are funded by the local administration. So it's the municipalities that provide funding, including staff, which is essentially what the problem that the municipality solves. Essentially, the municipality comes in the youth centers because there is a need for treasury for paying staff. In fact, when the public budget only provides partial funding, like for regular repairs or cleaning, it's difficult to find regular employees. So it's difficult to make a center work for in a constant way, temporal way. Some youth center adopt some specific funding, essentially strategies, because even municipalities sometimes have difficulty in funding the staff for the youth center. So, for example, in Poland, there is this formula, which is about paying for the cost of the staff of the youth center via the revenue of tax, of some special taxes, in this case, the alcohol tax. So it's something that is presented also to the population, it's a social legitimacy too. Because when you pay something with a specific tax, you are saying that you are paying more for beer, but that more that you are paying is going to a service for the youth of the community. Other ways are, for example, for the center to get funding, because the funding is never enough, is to get the own funding. Like, for example, in more structured youth centers, you have the German youth centers that provide a variety of service, and not only to the youth, but also to the adults, to the adult population. Many youth centers in Germany are also this kind of double phase, where the youth comes in the afternoon and the adults come in the morning when the youth are at school. And the adults make their activities, and the adults may also pay something for the activities because the activities are not funded. So it's all money generated. Also, German centers, for example, can do some kind of almost commercial operations, like selling beer to people above 16 years old, like renting rooms. But not all of this revenue, in this case, is taken by the youth center. So in general, when a youth center is financially stable, the excess revenue generally gets taken by the municipality back as form of return of investment.
I was wondering if you know about some kind of youth centers which use alternative forms of paying, like the Bank of Time, for example, to solve the financial issue, to have funding, basically.
Okay, there are several ways to get funding, but generally for example, there is the Bank of Time system, which now I don't remember how it works, but it's something that could also be used.
Bank of Time usually in a Bank of Time system, usually the currency that you use is not money as we intended, like euros or I don't know, other form of national currencies, but you basically pay with your time. So imagine that you are in a youth center which has some services, for example. I've never seen applying to youth centers. I've mostly seen apply to I don't know, like households or stuff like that. But you usually give your time. For example, you give 2 hours of your time to run a bar. I don't know, and in exchange you have 2 hours of time which you can use in the youth center to to enjoy a service which is held in the youth center, for example. I don't know, something like
Okay,
this.
yes, it
It's
was
just
what.
a broad idea.
Yes, and it was what I had in mind. Yes, no, we didn't see this system in particular used because most of the youth center that we surveyed exist as a philosophy of space for youth. Therefore, youth
Okay.
should not be paying for it, in this way.
Okay.
It's something that can be used, for example, for some centers, I think, that are very self-organized. Again, in Italy, we have a lot of this kind. But youth centers that essentially we want to provide for youth are not using this kind of. They are not looking at youth for finding the founding their activities directly, essentially. So not even with time. So even in Italy, we talk about volunteers, not bank of time system.
Okay.
You.
And a system in which you have a mixture of professional, in a sense of paid professional and volunteers. Could that help?
Yes, we have. We are looking. Yes, it's part of the scope. essentially, it's almost always professional plus volunteers. So organizational frameworks centered across various countries are a mix of open and welcoming spaces where young people can show up and engage in a variety of activities, from arts to social support. Let's make some examples. There is a strong difference between Sweden and other countries, because in Sweden, youth workers are trained to be youth workers. For example, they are not social workers in particular. They have a focus on free time, engagement, trust building, while some other countries have a more informal approach to the qualification needed. Centers in Italy offer instead informal spaces with minimal structure. More structure can be found maybe in centers which are more akin to community centers or church-run extra centers, instead of pure youth centers, which are the official ones. Youth centers are divided, for example, in some countries for age range. So there are the center for young people between 6 and 13, and the youth center for older young people, which is from 14 to 27, from 14 to 26. There are always challenges about staffing in all the countries, and also for professional skills. And Italy has especially a problem with coordinating different kind of stakeholders, because how to say, the concrete environment is very diverse. So the stakeholders are very different from each other and they are not connected. This is taught in relation to the Swedish system. So the Swedish system is complete interconnection, where you have the school, the center, the police, and the businesses. All of them converge to sell a package of its center and services, and all of them talk to each other. In Italy, there is all of the same stuff, but all of these different actors do not speak to each other and have therefore inefficiencies. Okay. So let's talk very fast about participation framework and policy frameworks, and then we will talk about some interesting correlation. Sometimes the framework for the participation is very related to culture. So, for example, the participation framework of Sweden and Italy are the most participative, but for opposite reasons. So while in Gothenburg there is, for example, in Sweden, there is, for example, a very strong democratic culture and a very strong integration of youth into the organization. And this is the reason why young people participate so much. Therefore, Sweden scores very high on the heart ladder of participation. So youth basically decide everything, decide activities, and then basically adults are the followers of what the youth does. In Italy is the same, but because there is a culture of essentially taking initiative in the hands of the young people, and their initiative is the only initiative. So the adults are the followers because it's the young people that do the thing. So it's interesting to see that both are ways that work, you know. You have very high participation in both countries, and in all the countries that are in the middle, in a sort of no man's valley, have lower level of participation, like for example in Germany, where the participation level of youth are way lower because there is the services always provided, but there is no so high engagement because youth are not they are not so much invited. They are invited, but they are not so much convinced, and at the same time don't have the need to act themselves. So there is a valley here from two tops of participation from young people. What is here? There are differences in the youth work, with distinction in services provided as a focus on safe spaces and skill development in Germany and Minsk, while other countries always concentrate on the space and concentrate more on providing this kind of free space instead of the activities. Okay, let's go forward. Am I here already? Yes. The level of youth participation in the management and activities of these centers can vary significantly across different countries and cultural contexts. This has an impact in the development of young people by providing a space for socialization, learning, and personal growth. There are places with strong support systems that facilitate communication. And the countries with strong connection to established frameworks like Guidebook and Nuremberg have youth center with clear objectives and quality assurance, but this can also lead to small improvements in the innovation sector. So when we see that these countries have very strong framework, okay, the presence of this framework and of rigid bureaucracy can stifle innovation. Like the new ideas may oftentimes come from the places with less structure. This is also true for youth centers. Because necessity makes virtue, you know. Policy frameworks. This is connected very much, maybe we should have do. This is chapter 5, but it's very linked to chapter 1. Yeah. Yes. The first finding about policy frameworks is that policy is essentially an echo of the people's legitimacy. So if you have a very much social recognition, you can have a policy that very much favors you. If you have a little social recognition, you won't have, or it will have very difficult to have a policy that favors you. The recommendation is in particular to include a clear position of youth centers in the policy. I anticipated this. Because when we were talking about legal frameworks, we talked about how sometimes the policy at national level or regional level talk about youth and their needs, but do not identify the means. So they do not identify youth centers, or even if they identify youth centers, exactly they identify them as means. This means, sorry for the plain words, that the youth center is not the objective of the policy. It's a means to an end. So when you have the policy is about the youth center, and the youth center is here, and the policy doesn't care about the youth center, because the policy is looking at bigger frame. This is something that can happen. In Italy is the case. We have a national strategy for youth center, we have a lot of things, but youth centers are not mentioned.
A strategy for youth work.
Yes, there is a strategy for youth work. This is something that helps in achieving legitimacy. The recommendations are a legal, political, and social recognition of youth workers and of the profession and their function, regulation of youth work and presence of positive references on youth work practices, again for legitimacy of their work, strong and positive narration on youth, and the youth participation, which means the youth that ask for themselves the things that they want. Is there any other question about chapters? Because then now we are going to look some interesting correlation within the statistical analysis.